There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the moment my son-in-law stood in front of the whole crew and called me a liability. Not even the moment the room went quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when something's just gone too far. The moment I keep coming back to is earlier than that. It's the moment I decided not to say a word, because I knew, even then, that silence was going to cost him a lot more than anything I could have said out loud. Let me back up. I'm 61 years old. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, the kind of place where you learn early that the ground itself can give out on you if you're not careful. My father worked in the mines. His father did too. By the time I was 17, I knew I didn't want that, but I understood something those mines had taught every family in that town. You don't cut corners on the things that hold everything else up. I didn't go to university. I want to be clear about that because it's going to matter later. I took a 2-year diploma at Northern College in business administration. Worked summers doing site cleanup for a mid-sized general contractor out of Timmins. And by the time I was 24, I was running a small crew doing residential renovation work out of a rusted Chevy pickup with a cracked windshield I never got fixed because I kept putting every dollar back into tools and materials. By 30, I had 11 employees. By 40, I had 38. By the time my daughter brought her husband home for the first time, I had a company doing just under $12 million in annual revenue, 31 full-time staff on payroll, and a line of credit I'd never once had to draw down past 60%. I didn't tell him any of that when I met him. His name is Chadwick. He goes by Chad. He's 34, has an MBA from Queens, and worked in corporate strategy at a mid-sized firm in Toronto. He's the kind of person who uses the phrase value proposition in casual conversation and then waits to see if you understand it. I understood it. I just didn't react, which I think he took as confirmation that I didn't. My daughter. I'll call her my daughter because she's mine and that's what she is. Whatever else is true. Met Chad at a conference in Ottawa about 3 years ago. She's smart, my daughter. Degree in environmental engineering, works for a municipal water authority. I'm prouder of her than I know how to say. She called me when she'd been dating Chad for about 4 months and said, "Dad, I really like him, but I want you to like him too." I told her I'd give him a fair shot. I meant it. The first dinner was at my place in Garson. I cooked. I always cook. It's one of the few things I do that has nothing to do with work. I made a roast with potatoes and carrots the way my wife used to make before she passed, and a rhubarb crisp for dessert because my daughter loves it. Chad came in, looked around the house, looked at the framed photos on the mantel and said, "Nice place. Very practical." I let that go. Over the next year, I let a lot of things go. The way he'd steer every conversation toward his own expertise. The way he'd explain things to me that I already knew slowly. With that particular patience people use when they've decided you're not quite up to speed. The way he'd look at my hands. Scarred, thick, rough, and the way hands get when they've been working for 40 years. And not say anything, but you could see the thought moving across his face. He never asked what I did. Not directly. My daughter told him I ran a small contracting business, and I think he made a picture in his head of what that meant and never updated it. I didn't correct the picture. I want to be honest here. Part of me was curious how long it would take. Part of me, the part that grew up watching my father come home from 12-hour shifts underground and still find the patience to help me with math homework. Part of me just didn't want to be the kind of person who announces himself before anyone asks. My father used to say the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the least to say. I believed him. Chad and my daughter got engaged the following spring. A ring that cost more than my first truck, bought on a line of credit I suspect he was still paying off. I said congratulations and meant it, because I love my daughter and I wanted her to be happy. But I started paying closer attention. What I noticed was that Chad talked about other people's money the way some men talk about other people's luck, like it explained everything about them, like it was the only number that mattered. He mentioned salaries in conversation like they were character assessments. He talked about guys who never scaled and people who peaked early, with the kind of pity that's really just a different shape of contempt. He never asked me what I'd scaled. He never asked me anything, actually. Not really. The thing that changed everything started the previous November, about 8 months before the wedding. I'd been dealing with a difficult stretch. Nothing catastrophic. A delayed payment from a municipal contract. A dispute with a subcontractor that was tying up some cash flow. But I'd had to make a few decisions I didn't love. And I was tired in the particular way you get tired when you've been running hard for a long time and the road isn't letting up. My daughter knew some of this. Not all of it. Chad had apparently decided, somewhere along the way, that he should become more involved in family business matters. I found this out when my daughter mentioned he'd asked her some questions about the company, what kind of margins we operated on, whether I had a succession plan, whether the business was actually viable long-term or more of a lifestyle operation. I asked her how she answered. She said, "I told him to ask you. He never asked me." What he did instead, and I only found out about this much later, was start talking to my business partner, a man named Duff who'd been with me for 19 years and who I trusted completely. Duff told me about it the week before everything came apart. He said Chad had approached him at a family barbecue, pulled him aside, and started asking questions about the company's organizational structure. Whether I was really still the right person to be making decisions, whether there was appetite for bringing in professional management. Duff said he'd smiled and changed the subject, but he thought I should know. I sat with that for a week. The thing about building something over 30 years is that you learn to see clearly. Not quickly, always, but clearly. And what I saw clearly was that my son-in-law had made a decision about me based on no evidence at all, based on a picture he'd drawn in his own head, and never once checked against reality. He'd decided I was a certain kind of man, the kind who'd built something modest and was grateful for it, the kind who wouldn't notice the size of the room because he'd never seen a bigger one. He wasn't entirely wrong that I was grateful, but he'd badly misjudged the room. The occasion came 6 weeks later, at a company dinner I hold every year for the crew. The full team, spouses and partners included. We do it at a restaurant in Sudbury. Nothing fancy, but the food is good, and the back room fits everyone. I started this tradition years ago because I think the people who pour their time into a company deserve to be acknowledged, not just in their pay stubs, but in person, by name, with a meal. It matters. My father would have appreciated it. My daughter brought Chad. I hadn't planned anything. I want to make that clear. I had no script, no moment I was waiting for, no speech prepared. I just knew, standing at the back of that room watching 31 people I'd hired and trained and fought for, that if Chad decided to use this night to establish something, I wasn't going to stop him. He decided to use it. About halfway through dinner, after the appetizers, when people were comfortable, when the room was warm and a little noisy and everyone was loosened up, Chad got up to get a drink from the bar and ended up talking to a few of the younger site supervisors. I wasn't close enough to hear everything, but I caught the shape of it. He was doing what he did, explaining things, asking leading questions, using the vocabulary he used when he wanted to reframe a conversation so that he was at the center of it. Then he came back to the table. My daughter was talking to Duff's wife. Chad leaned over to me, not quite a whisper, not quite a normal speaking volume, and said, "Your guys out there seem sharp. You know what they need? Real leadership infrastructure. You can't run a 30-person operation like it's a 4-person crew." I said, "That's probably right." He looked at me for a moment, like he wasn't sure if I was agreeing or not. I kept my face easy. "I've been thinking," he said, "that there might be an opportunity here for some structural improvements. Not a criticism, just, objectively, the way this kind of company operates, there's a ceiling. And the guys out there, the good ones, they're going to hit it. They'll leave." I said, He straightened up a little. I put together some thoughts. Nothing formal, just a framework. I was going to mention it to you after the wedding, but honestly, now that I'm seeing the team, I think sooner is better. I think you need someone with a different skill set at the table, someone who's actually done this at scale. I said, "What kind of scale?" He told me about a project he'd consulted on, something in the range of $800,000 in annualized cost savings through headcount reduction. He said headcount reduction. The way some people say unfortunately, as if the word itself was regrettable, but the logic was sound. I looked at the room. 31 people, 31 families, people who'd been with me for 5 years, for 12 years, for 19 years, people who'd poured concrete in -30 weather and laughed about it later, people who'd taken my calls at 10 at night and shown up at 6 in the morning. I said, "What kind of headcount reduction are we talking about?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a spreadsheet. He'd actually made a spreadsheet. It was, and I'll give him this, organized, color-coded. He'd identified what he called redundant roles. 8 of them, 9 if you included a part-time administrator who I'd hired specifically so she could work school hours because she was a single mother, and I'd thought at the time that being the kind of company that makes room for that kind of thing was worth whatever the inconvenience. I kept my face easy. Where'd you get this information? He shrugged. I pulled some publicly available stuff, talked to a few people, made some assumptions. It's a preliminary model. But the direction is right. He paused. I know this isn't how you're used to thinking about it, but honestly, and I say this with respect, this is what happens when you build something without formal training. You make it work, but you don't optimize it. Someone with real credentials, real management experience could take this and what? He smiled. Could make it run properly, professionally. I'm not saying what you built isn't. He chose his word carefully, impressive. For what it is. But the next chapter needs different leadership. You know that, right? I didn't say anything. He took my silence for assent, I think. He set his phone down on the table. I didn't want to say it this directly, but look, I'll be honest with you. If I were hiring for the person who runs this company, I wouldn't hire you. You don't have the background. You don't have the credentials. You built it, yes. But building it and running it properly going forward, those are different skill sets. I can help. That's what I'm offering. The table nearby had gone quiet. A couple of the site supervisors had drifted close enough to hear the last part. Duff was standing near the bar, and I could see from his expression that he'd caught some of it too. The room, in that particular way rooms do, went still. I sat with it for a moment. There was something almost peaceful about it, honestly. Like the moment before a weather system that's been building for a while finally arrives. I picked up my glass. I said, Chad, do you know who owns this company? He looked at me. You do. Do you know how it's structured? A private corporation, I assume. Do you know what the company's annual revenue was last year? A pause. I made some estimates. Do you know what our net margin was? Another pause. Do you know what our safety record is? How many WorkSafe BC violations we've had in 30 years? What our client retention rate looks like? Do you know anything about this company beyond what you put in a color-coded spreadsheet on your phone? The room was very quiet now. Chad said, I was working with available information. You were working with a story you made up, I said, not loud, not angry, and this is important, because I was not angry. I was calm the way you get calm when you've been clear-eyed about something for a long time, and it's finally just time to say it plainly. You decided what I was. You decided what this is. And you never asked. I set my glass down. I looked around the room, at the faces I'd known for years, some of them since they were 22 years old, and didn't know yet what they were capable of. This company did $11.8 million in revenue last year, I said. Our net margin was 16%. That's above industry average for our sector in Northern Ontario. We have never, not once, had a safety order issued against us by the Ministry of Labour. Our average employee tenure is 9 years. That part-time administrator you flagged for elimination has been with me for 11 years. She does the work of 2 people, and she does it on a schedule that lets her be home when her kids get off the school bus. Because I decided a long time ago that a company worth working for is one that understands people have lives outside of it. I looked at Chad. I didn't hire a manager to run this company because I am the manager. I didn't bring in outside expertise because I built the expertise, the same way I built everything else. By doing the work, making mistakes, fixing them, and doing the work again. I have no university degree. What I have is a company that employs 31 people who go home to their families every night and have benefits and pension contributions, and a workplace where they are treated like the adults they are. I paused. You said you wouldn't hire me. That's fine, you don't have to. But just so we're clear about the shape of the room, I have been signing your paycheck since March. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room where everyone's understood something at exactly the same moment. Chad didn't say anything for a long time. Let me explain what I meant by that last part. In March, 3 months before that dinner, Chad's firm had taken on a new client, a property development company that had contracted my company for site preparation and foundation work on a mixed-use project in New Sudbury. We were a subcontractor on that project. Chad's firm was doing strategic consulting for the development company. The development company was paying Chad's firm. His firm was paying him. The money that landed in Chad's account every 2 weeks had at one point passed through a chain of transactions that started with a check from my business to a client. Not a metaphor. Not a technicality. Literally. The project that was paying his salary existed because my company had bid on it, won it, and was executing it. I hadn't planned to mention it. I truly hadn't. But he'd laid out the spreadsheet, and I'm a man who deals in facts. My daughter from across the table looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was the expression she used to make when she was 12, and I'd said something at a parent-teacher interview that was more true than kind. A small wince followed by, I think, a private acknowledgement that the thing was fair. Chad said quietly, "I didn't know that." "No," I said. "You didn't ask." What happened after that was not dramatic. There was no blow-up, no tears, no storming out. Chad sat very still for the rest of the evening. My daughter came and sat beside me after a while and took my hand and didn't say anything, and I appreciated that more than I could tell her. Duff, because he's a good man, got up and said something funny about the dessert menu and steered the table back to safer ground, and by the end of the night people were laughing again. We drove home separately. My daughter called me the next day. She said, "Dad, I need to ask you something." I said, "Go ahead." "Did you know? About the project?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Since March, and you didn't say anything." He didn't ask. There was a long pause. Then she said, "He's embarrassed." I said, "I know, he wants to apologize." I said, "He doesn't have to, but if he wants to, I'll hear him." She said, "Is the company okay?" "You mentioned the delayed payment last fall." "It's fine," I said. "It's been fine for a while, I just didn't want to worry you." She was quiet for a moment. "Dad." "Yeah. He said something to me last night, after we got home." She paused. "He said he thought you were just a contractor." I thought about that, about the word just. About the particular distance that word puts between a person and what they've actually done. I said, "I am a contractor. That's what I am. That's what I've been for 37 years. She said very softly, "He understands that now." Chad came to the house 3 weeks later, alone on a Saturday morning. He stood in the kitchen while I poured coffee and he said, without any preamble, "I owe you an apology. I made a lot of assumptions. I was arrogant about things I didn't understand. And I said something in front of your staff that I had no business saying." I put a cup in front of him. He said, "I should have asked." I said, "Yes." He wrapped his hands around the mug. His hands, for the record, smooth, unmarked. The hands of someone who has never poured a footing or run a line or broken a blister in a worksite parking lot at 6 in the morning. And he said, "Is there anything I can do to make it right?" I thought about it. I said, "Yes. You can stop using the word just when you talk about what people do for a living." He looked up. "Contractors," I said. "Mechanics. Laborers. Administrators who work school hours. People who do things with their hands and their backs and their time. People who built everything you walk on and through and into every day of your life. Don't say just. It doesn't mean what you think it means. It means you've stopped looking." He nodded. "I'm not going to tell you it was a transformation. I've been alive long enough to know that people change slowly and that a single conversation, even a hard one, doesn't undo years of a particular way of seeing." But he heard it. I believe he actually heard it. The wedding was in July. My daughter was beautiful. Duff cried, which I'll never let him forget. The food was good, the speeches were decent, and at the end of the night Chad shook my hand, a real handshake, firm, the kind that means something, and said, "I hope we're okay." I said, "That's the honest answer. That's the only one I've got. The company is still running, all 31 positions intact. The administrator is still with me. The site supervisors still call me when something comes up. We had a good winter, a solid spring, and a project in Chelmsford that came in under budget, and 6 days ahead of schedule, which I will not stop being pleased about." I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't wave a spreadsheet back in anyone's face. I just waited until the room was ready, and then I told the truth about what was in it.